Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank our panel for being here. The disconnect between incentives created by wholesale power market rules and the need for commitments to ensure the availability of pipeline capacity has been widely noted. What can Congress do to help this problem? Now, I admit one of the worst decisions Congress ever made was back in the 70s saying we can't use natural gas. Of course, back then, natural gas was a very precious resource. And even 8 years ago, it was $12, $13 an MCF. So, but Congress does overreact like they did in the 70s. What can we do to help that certainty?
A couple of thoughts there. One is, as the Inga witness mentioned, and we would agree, there are wholesale market rules that need to be addressed. Where we disagree is you can't simply surgically say, well, if a gas-fired generator enters into a 20-year contract for firm gas transportation, you're just going to pass that along to consumers because that could be a considerable expense. So what happens is, under the watch of FERC, the regions work on this, and they're doing that now. They're looking at those issues. So I think by holding the hearings you held last month, by continuing to hold hearings and do oversight of FERC that oversees the wholesale market, that's, I think, what Congress can do. There's really no need for additional legislation. But what also needs to happen, and maybe there's a congressional role here, I'm not sure, is it's not just the wholesale market, it's the retail market. And the retail market's under the jurisdiction of the states. And I'll give you a specific example. If we were to have gas-fired generators in New England enter into long-term contracts for gas transportation, one, it's not necessary most of the time, but put that aside. There are states in the region, Connecticut in particular, that has a bill moving through the legislature very rapidly as we're meeting today, that would hotwire a pipeline and a long-term contract for Canadian hydro from Quebec, from a Crown corporation in Canada, that is opposed by the governor of New Hampshire, it's opposed by Massachusetts, but if it's passed by Connecticut, it will artificially suppress the market price and make it very difficult for anybody to arrange for long-term gas transportation. So I think Congress can maybe help shed some light on that, but ultimately it's the jurisdiction over FERC.
Well, I have to admit, all my life I've heard about the Austin to Boston connection for natural gas, and I've always wondered why they still burn coal oil. But anyway, Mrs. Heifel, my next question is, I want to talk about the reliability of the natural gas pipelines. Do you or Dominion have many outages, and what's the key to the reliability in the pipeline sector? And what's the fundamental changes in your market area that's causing you to change your pipeline operations?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Congressman. I would tell you that the pipeline, natural gas interstate pipeline grid has been extremely reliable to serve those customers who have signed up for primary firm transportation. The pipeline system was designed around those contracts. And as there's growth in given markets, and there's the market signal from the market by way of a long-term contract that says they need additional capacity, that capacity is built. And those markets are served extremely reliably. You ask about Dominion's experience with reliability. You know, we did go back and look at this for our primary firm contracts over a period of time. And our reliability has been absolutely phenomenal. We went back the last 3 years and had 0 interruptions with regard to primary firm transportation. And I know there was one run, we went 7 years, we had no impact on any primary firm contract or contracts. So the pipeline grid is extremely reliable for those who pay for that service. Many times there are folks who refer to reliability as a pipeline is not being reliable, are really looking at interruptible type transportation contracts, and you can't talk about that as reliability. The pipeline system was not designed to meet those on a reliable basis. That's actually transportation capacity that's used by markets that are paying for it that are not using it at any given time. And when those markets who are paying for that under primary firm actually need it, that's when it's pulled back. And that's really been much of the concern that Inga's really talked about as you go forward, and more transportation is needed by growing markets, whether that's power generation or industrial load or growing local distribution load. What it really says is there's going to be more and more demand on the pipeline system, and really counting on capacity that's not used by the current market that pays for that under primary firm is the real risk.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I'm almost out of time, but I have a couple other questions on cogen, and I'd like to submit it to the panel. We went through that battle in the legislature in the 80s, and at that time, my friends were on both sides, and I was with my friends. But it worked out in Texas somehow that in cogen, during cap and trade, I wanted cogeneration to be considered one of our energy savings because it's such a benefit not only to the customers but the industry. But again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the hearing.